silver spoon?" I queried. "No fear, salt's what you'll get, and I've seen some places where you'd not get any spoon. Hold her up and let her run down, that's how they do it." "You do get good skilly at Hackney," said the Carter. "Oh, wonderful skilly, that," praised the Carpenter, and each looked eloquently at the other. "Flour and water at St. George's in the east," said the Carter. The Carpenter nodded. He had tried them all. "Then what?" I demanded, and I was informed that I was sent directly to bed. "Call you at 5:30 in the morning, and you get up and take a sluice, if there's any soap. Then breakfast, same as supper, 3 parts of skilly and a 6-ounce loaf." "'Tisn't always 6 ounces," corrected the Carter. "'Tisn't, no, and often that's sour you can hardly eat it. When first I started I couldn't eat the skilly nor the bread, but now I can eat my own and another man's portion." "I could eat 3 other men's portions," said the Carter. "I haven't had a bit this blessed day." "Then what?" "Then you've got to do your task, pick 4 pounds of oakum, or clean and scrub, or break 10 to 11 hundredweight of stones. I don't have to break stones, I'm past 60, you see. They'll make you do it, though. You're young and strong." "What I don't like," grumbled the Carter, "is to be locked up in a cell to pick oakum. It's too much like prison." "But suppose after you've had your night's sleep you refuse to pick oakum, or break stones, or do any work at all?" I asked. "No fear you'll refuse the second time. They'll run you in," answered the Carpenter. "Wouldn't advise you to try it on, my lad." "Then comes dinner," he went on. 8 ounces of bread, 1½ ounces of cheese, and cold water. Then you finish your task and have supper, same as before, 3 parts of skilly and 6 ounces of bread. Then to bed, 6 o'clock, and next morning you're turned loose, provided you've finished your task." We had long since left Mile End Road, and after traversing a gloomy maze of narrow, winding streets, we came to Poplar Workhouse. On a low stone wall we spread our handkerchiefs, and each in his handkerchief put all his worldly possessions, with the exception of the bit of baccy down his sock. And then, as the last light was fading from the drab-coloured sky, the wind blowing cheerless and cold, we stood with our pitiful little bundles in our hands, a forlorn group at the workhouse door. 3 working girls came along, and one looked pityingly at me. As she passed, I followed her with my eyes, and she still looked pityingly back at me. The old men she did not notice. Dear Christ! She pitied me, young and vigorous and strong, but she had no pity for the 2 old men who stood by my side. She was a young woman, and I was a young man, and what vague sex promptings impelled her to pity me put her sentiment on the lowest plane. Pity for old men is an altruistic feeling, and besides, the workhouse door is the accustomed place for old men. So she showed no pity for them, only for me, who deserved it least or not at all. Not in honour do grey hairs go down to the grave in London town. On one side the door was a bell handle, on the other side a press button. "Ring the bell," said the Carter to me, and just as I ordinarily would at anybody's door, I pulled out the handle and rang a peal. "Oh, oh!" they cried in one terrified voice. "Not so hard!" I let go, and they looked reproachfully at me, as though I had imperilled their chance for a bed and 3 parts of skilly. Nobody came. Luckily it was the wrong bell, and I felt better. "Press the button," I said to the Carpenter. No, wait a bit," the Carter hurriedly interposed. From all of which I drew the conclusion that a poorhouse porter, who commonly draws a yearly salary of from £7 to £9, is a very finicky and important personage, and cannot be treated too fastidiously by paupers. So we waited 10 times a decent interval, when the Carter stealthily advanced a timid forefinger to the button and gave it the faintest, shortest possible push. I have looked at waiting men where life or death was in the issue, but anxious suspense showed less plainly on their faces than it showed on the faces of these 2 men as they waited on the coming of the porter. He came. He barely looked at us. "Full up," he said, and shut the door. "Another night of it," groaned the Carpenter. In the dim light the Carter looked wan and grey. "Indiscriminate charity is vicious," say the professional philanthropists. Well, I resolved to be vicious. "Come on, get your knife out and come here," I said to the Carter, drawing him into a dark alley. He glared at me in a frightened manner, and tried to draw back. Possibly he took me for a latter-day Jack the Ripper, with a penchant for elderly male paupers. Or he may have thought I was inveigling him into the commission of some desperate crime. Anyway, he was frightened. It will be remembered at the outset that I sewed a pound inside my stoker's singlet under the armpit. This was my emergency fund, and I was now called upon to use it for the first time. Not until I had gone through the acts of a contortionist and shown the round coin sewed in did I succeed in getting the carter's help. Even then his hand was trembling so that I was afraid he would cut me instead of the stitches, and I was forced to take the knife away and do it myself. Out rolled the gold piece, a fortune in their hungry eyes, and away we stampeded for the nearest coffee-house. Of course, I had to explain to them that I was merely an investigator, a social student, seeking to find out how the other half lived, and at once they shut up like clams. I was not of their kind. My speech had changed, the tones of my voice were different. In short, I was a superior, and they were superbly class-conscious. "What will you have?" I asked, as the waiter came for the order. "2 slices and a cup of tea," meekly said the carter. "2 slices and a cup of tea," meekly said the carpenter. Stop a moment and consider the situation. Here were 2 men invited by me into the coffee-house. They had seen my gold piece, and they could understand that I was no pauper. One had eaten a halfpenny roll that day, the other had eaten nothing, and they called for 2 slices and a cup of tea. Each man had given a twopenny order. 2 slices, by the way, means 2 slices of bread and butter. This was the same degraded humility that had characterized their attitude towards the poorhouse porter. But I wouldn't have it. Step by step I increased their order. Eggs, rashers of bacon, more eggs, more bacon, more tea, more slices, and so forth, they denying wistfully all the while that they cared for anything more, and devouring it ravenously as fast as it arrived. "First cup of tea I've had in a fortnight," said the carter. "Wonderful tea, that," said the carpenter. They each drank 2 pints of it, and I assure you that it was slops. It resembled tea less than lager beer resembles champagne. Nay, it was water bewitched, and did not resemble tea at all. It was curious, after the first shock, to notice the effect the food had on them. At first they were melancholy, and talked of the divers times they had contemplated suicide. The carter, not a week before, had stood on the bridge and looked at the water, and pondered the question. Water, the carpenter insisted with heat, was a bad route. He, for one, he knew, would struggle. A bullet was handier, but how, under the sun, was he to get hold of a revolver? That was the rub. They grew more cheerful as the hot tea soaked in, and talked more about themselves. The carter had buried his wife and children, with the exception of one son, who grew to manhood and helped him in his little business. Then the thing happened. The son, a man of 31, died of the smallpox. No sooner was this over than the father came down with fever and went to the hospital for 3 months. Then he was done for. He came out weak, debilitated, no strong young son to stand by him, his little business gone glimmering, and not a farthing. The thing had happened, and the game was up. No chance for an old man to start again. Friends all poor and unable to help. He had tried for work when they were putting up the stands for the first coronation parade. And I got fair sick of the answer, "No, no, no." It rang in my ears at night when I tried to sleep, always the same, "No, no, no." Only the past week he had answered an advertisement in Hackney, and on giving his age was told, "Oh, too old by far." The carpenter had been born in the army, where his father had served 22 years. Likewise his 2 brothers had gone into the army, one troop sergeant major of the 7th Hussars, dying in India after the mutiny. The other, after 9 years under Roberts in the East, had been lost in Egypt. The carpenter had not gone into the army, so here he was, still on the planet. "But here, give me your hand," he said, ripping open his ragged shirt. "I'm fit for the anatomist, that's all. I'm wasting away, sir, actually wasting away for want of food. Feel my ribs and you'll see." I put my hand under his shirt and felt. The skin was stretched like parchment over the bones, and the sensation produced was for all the world like running one's hand over a washboard. 7 years of bliss I had, he said. "A good missus and 3 bonny lassies.